I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. On this video, we're back on the 69 Nova, and today we are going to be sandblasting. More specifically, we'll be wet blasting this car. This, I feel, is a perfect candidate for wet blasting. As you could see, there's really nothing on the inside for any of the water and sand to be clumped up in. Washing this car out should be a pretty straightforward process. It is a nice day. It did rain really hard last night, so we're just kind of letting everything dry off around the area. It doesn't really matter as long as it doesn't rain while we're in the process of blasting, and so far it looks like it's a really nice day. Be here in North Carolina, we never know. I'm gonna not go into super great detail. If you've seen other videos of mine, we've done wet blasting in the past on other cars. We've gone into really great detail on the process and everything. The main thing, like I said, we are going to use a rust inhibitor in the water pot that we're using. We're using a medium crushed glass that we're going to load in the blasting pot, and we are going to try to get this thing in epoxy primer once we fully dry it off beforehand. I did go through this car and I did remove any kind of seam sealer or anything that I feel the sandblaster would have a hard time trying to blast off. So really what we have here is a completely stripped down car, ready to be blasted and ready for epoxy primer. Then it should theoretically be ready for the build process. So if you haven't seen how we got to this part of this car, please go back after this video and watch part 1 with the intro and part 2 with the cut down of the 69 Nova. Let's get to blasting right now. So before we get to the blasting itself, our first step is going to be to add the express blast, which is our water conditioner, to the water tank while we're filling it up with the well water. So there's a calculated ratio for the well water that we are adding on this express blast. While the water tank is going to continue filling up, we're going to go ahead and add in our medium crushed glass. So this is what I found is a good compromise on giving you a very good texture to let the epoxy adhere, but not having the texture too deep or too pitted where the epoxy is going to look wavy. You'll see the epoxy when we lay it on this car should be really smooth and slick, but also have a good adhesion. Also, the medium grit crushed glass I feel is the best compromise in cutting down the car with the rust and everything else, removing rust in a timely manner while also not doing damage to the metal itself. You could see on this blaster we are adding the media directly to the pot, so this would be filled up just like any dry pot. We're going to push in the media all the way. I filled up this pot with 9 bags starting out, and then what we'll go ahead and do, I'll take the hose and just kind of go around quickly and wipe off the top, get the sand in there. What you don't want to do is add water into the pot before all the media is in there, because once it gets all wet it just has a hard time moving. And then what we'll do, we'll use that water tank to fill up the pot with the pumping system of the sandblaster. So that's going to pump the express blast and the conditioned water into the pot to fill it up the rest of the way. And then we add pressure, and now you could see we have started the blasting process. So this car right here had a bunch of surface rust everywhere. Some of it's actually pitted pretty good. This is a perfect example on why I try to strip these cars down to almost nothing, at least the external skins off them, and we open them up and take a look at the insides of this car, because outside this car was not as bad as it was inside. And saying that, this is why we do need to sandblast. This would be a very hard car, I feel, and very time consuming to take wire brushes, to take acid treatment like Osfo, or just to do this all by hand. The sandblasting really does make a half a day job of it at the grand scheme of things. Obviously it depends on how deep the rust is, how pitted it is, and how many layers of material are on this Nova itself. But as you can see, even in time lapse, we're at 8 times as fast right now. This is a pretty smooth process where I'm just holding the blaster on the metal and I'm just walking it forward very slowly, focusing on one area, and we're just kind of take this car in sections, because you could see the sand and water as it comes off has that rusted water look anyway. So when it starts laying around like on the rockers right now, you could see it almost looks like there's still rust on the car. So if you focus on one area and you just do that section and move around the car, it's less of a chance to miss something. You could see I also did get really heavy inside the rocker panels. It's a great thing right now that we don't have wheel houses on this car or the front firewall. We can blast right through the rockers, and so much junk and stuff came out of this stuff. There was some seam sealer in there and everything else. Now when we add the epoxy, we are also going to seal up all these areas with epoxy. So anything we sandblast and we're focused on removing the rust, we want to then seal it up, and you'll see that on the future step. The number one question I get all the time is why choose the wet blasting over the dry blasting. And personally, the wet blasting is more of a preference for me, as far as I can see better with the car. You could see, it's hard to tell in this video, but there really is no sand going anywhere. There's a mist of water that just kind of is blowing right around. It keeps everything around the shop and the property a lot cleaner, which also doesn't bother other surrounding areas. So I can blast and no one's going to bother us as much where we are, and I don't have to add a fresh air mask because the mist itself keeps everything with the glass down, so you don't have to worry about silica poisoning. And then those masks, it's hard to see on them. So that's an idea on why we wet blast. I feel it is also a little more efficient on these cars, but if you want to dry blast this car, it would be more than acceptable and the job would come out just as good as this wet blasting. So what we're doing right now, the most important part of the wet blasting, we're in the wash down phase, and we're just removing everything out of the sand and all the material that we threw at this car. This is one of the most crucial steps, because if you don't wash this car down very well, this is the stuff that's going to be stuck in the paint. Anywhere there's sand left over is going to want to surface rust underneath, because the water conditioner can't dry out properly like that. And so saying that, the last step on the wet blasting process, we are going to take the diesel compressor and we're just focusing on removing the major water puddles. So we're going to try to dry this car. It's 85 degrees out here today and the sun is kind of on and off baking this car. So that's going to help us dry it out. We're going to leave it out a little bit. Let's go ahead and get this car in the shop and talk about what we've done with it. All right, so we got the car dragged back inside. What I did, I let it bake out in the sun for about an hour or so, just to let everything, dry off completely. Then we took some air in here and we went through the whole car with the clean shop air and also cleaned it out a little bit further. Walking around the car, you could see it's not 100% perfect, but compared to what it was, the car's all in clean, fresh metal. What we're gonna do tonight, we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna prep the rest of the car, any spots that I might have missed with a belt sander. We're gonna use a DA sander on certain areas, and we might just hand scuff some other areas. And we are gonna add weld through primer to all these areas that we know that we're gonna have to address in the future and be welded on, so we don't have to remove the epoxy primer. They'll be already prepped before we shoot the epoxy. So when we put the new parts on, it'll be just smooth, hopefully smoother sailing. So saying that, let's get the car in the paint booth. You'll see it, it should be all taped up. We'll put 2 coats of epoxy primer and we'll close out this video. So you could see we did a bunch of work for the Nova off camera. Like I said, we did take the shop air, we re-blew everything out. We did fix a couple spots here or there that I know we slightly missed on the sandblaster. It's hard to see with all the water spraying back at you, the sand everywhere once you're in the rhythm. So saying that, all those areas were addressed. We added our weld through primer, let that dry overnight, just because we come back the next day right here and taped up the whole entire car. Once the car is taped up, we rolled it in the booth, got everything cleaned out one more time before we did roll it in the booth, and now we're going to add 2 coats of Omni MP 172 black epoxy. So we did give a 20-minute flash period before we started this first coat. What we're going to do the whole car one time. You can see it doesn't look like a lot, but to get in every corner and crevice, that it does take quite a bit of primer to even do this. But once we do our first coat on this car, we'll go ahead and let everything flash over. Then we can come back through with our second coat of epoxy primer in about 20 minutes, depending on the weather today. So the good thing about doing 2 coats is you have less a chance of missing everything. So let's go ahead and wrap up this video on this 1969 Nova. All right, we're gonna wrap up this video on the 69 Nova, walking around this car. You could see we have everything now in epoxy primer. We have removed the tape with all the exposed weld through primer. Saying that, there's one or two spots that I know I missed taping up that I didn't add weld through primer to. Not a huge issue. As we go along on the build process, we'll come through, we'll grind off the epoxy primer in these areas, add our weld through primer, and then weld at that point. What we've done for the most part is try to be efficient with all these areas, because now the frame rails, all the torque boxes, where the quarters go here in the wheel houses, drip rails included, we don't have to clean anything up. Theoretically, we should be able to test fit the panels, prep the panels with the weld through primer, and the owner does want all the new panels also stripped down the bare metal so we can control everything that we're applying and adding on the car. But the car itself will be ready after the panels are test fit to accept the panels, and we could start the welding process. Once we're done with that, we will come back through and we will epoxy everything else on the outside. The weld through primer is more for the adjoining butted surfaces laying on top of each other to stop rust added from forming from there. Saying that, is stuff that the factory didn't do, and this is one example on how we try to make these cars a lot better. The next steps on this car, we are going to start patching some of the rocker areas, and then you'll see it will follow the process that most of the Novas do follow by adding the trunk floor in first, and then we'll work our way forward. We'll do the trunk floor, we'll do the firewall, we'll do the dash, and then the floor pan will be installed after both of those are done, because it sits in the center of them. We will test fit all the parts we're fitting first. That will be all done again off camera. So it'll be a little bit before this video, the next video on this car does come out. You could see there are a lot of builds going on in the shop. So I do rotate between everything else, and it keeps us, we rock and roll on all these cars, but it allows us a little bit of downtime. One, we don't rush it. This epoxy, it's now the next day. 12 hours since we primed the car. I'm still not really touching it. It's dry to the touch, but what we try to do is we will give it a week before we really do start actually working on the car to make sure the epoxy has completely cured. So saying that, hopefully you like this video. The car, I mean, at this point, the good thing is we aren't really destroying it anymore. Now should start the rebuild process, and we should hopefully have a good, solid build platform to work up from there. I also want to point out, walking around this car, that if you see some sand spots and everything, that's completely normal. I blew this car off for quite a while, one with the diesel air compressor and also with the shop air cleaning it. I did go over in DA and prep some other areas. We did our best to clean the car, but we've thrown so much sand at this car that it does come out on the odds and ends places just when we're spraying. So that's why we now sandblast first, and you're gonna see throughout the process, we are gonna clean this car, and you'll see sand still coming out of them every now and then. That's just part of the sandblasting process. However, once we're done with this car, really we should get all the sand out of it, for the most part, get all the sand out of it. But in the areas, with the epoxy that, we'll go back over and scuff up certain areas. Other areas behind the quarter panel, if there's a couple bits of sand stuck in the epoxy, no one's ever gonna know. The main purpose of the epoxy is to prevent rust and to protect the metal on the car. Also saying that, you can see we did wash, blast, and everything through the rockers. Great thing about not having wheel wells and the front mounts in the firewall is we can blast right through these rockers. I also took a bunch of epoxy and just laid it in there as heavy as I can. Same thing in these areas. If you see a couple runs, we're just focused on getting the epoxy on the internal structures as best we can. So that about concludes this car. Stay tuned for another video, either on this car or another one in the shop. Please check out our Facebook page, Carthage Classic Cars. Please like, comment, and subscribe to this YouTube video, and we'll stay tuned for the next build. I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars, and we'll see you next time.